Thanks for joining me today for this video. This is the first in a series on choosing the right optic for your firearm. My name's Eric. I am the instructor for Rocky Mountain Gun Owners and the National Association for Gun Rights. I shoot thousands of rounds a year, and I'm lucky enough to have a 1,400-yard rifle range in my backyard. I compete in 3-gun, long-range, and pistol competitions. I grew up in the mountains of Leadville, and I've been hunting since I was 10 years old, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work. Choosing a rifle scope or an optic can be a daunting task. There are so many things to consider. I'm going to give you some of my recommendations and opinions and some things to think about. So let's dive in. The first thing we have to consider is obviously what gun is the optic going to go on and how is it going to mount. So we've got to decide if we have a Picatinny rail, if we've got rings, or if we want to do a quick detach mount. I do believe that good quality rings do help. So sometimes skimping on the rings that you purchase may not be the best idea. I am a fan of quick detach mounts like you see on this rifle right here. This is an American Defense. It has a quick detach mount. It allows me to take the optic off. The nice thing about that is if you're on a tight budget and you want to buy an expensive optic, you can get a quick detach mount and put this on multiple guns, multiple rifles, and spread that out across different guns. Now, the cons to that are obviously every time you put it on a new gun, you've got to go back out on the range and sight it in. So there's some time and expense to re-zeroing the scope on the rifle you put it on, but that is definitely an option. Something we all have to consider is your budget. I have scopes up here running anywhere from under $100 all the way up to probably over $5,000. So what you can afford to spend on a scope is what you can afford to spend. You do get what you pay for. I do believe as you get into the higher end stuff, it's kind of diminishing returns once you get up past a certain point, but you definitely get what you pay for in an optic. Some of the terms you're going to hear are, for example, this is a 5 to 25 by 50. And what that's talking about is the magnification and exit pupil size of the scope. So this scope goes from 5 power up to 25 power and has a 50 millimeter objective on the end. A larger objective will allow for better light gathering. The other thing you're going to see in a scope is the size of the tube. 1-inch tube, 30 millimeter tube, 34 millimeter tube. That is the thickness of the scope. Typically, the thicker the scope is, the more range of adjustment and the better light gathering the scope's going to have. And typically, the bigger this tube is, the more expensive the scope costs. Keep in mind too that your rings and your mounts have to correspond with your tube thickness. Another thing you're going to hear a lot about is first or second focal plane. That is a video and a subject all in itself. We will do one on that and cover it in detail and show you guys exactly what that looks like. But basically, the reticle is either put in the first or the second focal plane. A first focal plane reticle does not change as you zoom in and out with your magnification. A second focal plane, as you zoom in and out, the reticle also zooms in and out. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both, which we will cover in a later video. MIL or MOA, you hear a lot about that. All of my shooting buddies love to sit out and kind of argue about what's better, what's worse. They both have advantages and disadvantages. What I have found, I kind of like MIL, but it's a matter of opinion. It is nice to have the same thing all your friends have. That way when you're shooting long range, you can say how many mil holdover is that, and and you guys can kind of speak the same language. But something to consider when you're buying a scope is whether you're going to buy MIL or MOA. Another thing that's really important is the company and the warranty that comes with the scope. I'm a big fan of Burris. One, as an instructor, they give me really good deals, and I'm on a budget, so I can get really good scopes from them at a highly discounted price. I also get discounts from Leupold. Also a big fan of them. But stick with a scope that has a really good warranty. Burris has lifetime warranty. Leupold has an excellent warranty. I love Vortex. I have some Vortex products up here we'll talk about. But Vortex has one of the best warranties in the industry. When you're dropping hard-earned cash on a scope, it's nice to know that the company is going to back that up. We now need to think about the purpose. So we decided about the gun it's going to go on. Now, what is the purpose of this gun? Are you going to plink with it? Tactical, hunting, self-defense? For example, this is just a little 22 that I love to shoot, primary weapon systems 22. It's built on a Ruger 1022 platform. It is a bolt gun. This is a plinker. This has a inexpensive Burris 2x7 scope on it. When you're out plinking, this is not that critical. If something happens, if it gets knocked off of being sighted in, or it fogs up, or it breaks, you're out plinking. You can go back to the truck and get something else. So typically you can get away with something less expensive in that situation. And also a 22, very low recoil. As you get into heavier recoil, that scope has to be able to take the recoil of the gun. If you're mounting an optic on a 50 cal, that optic has to be able to take a tremendous amount of force and shock from that gun. We're going to talk a little bit about tactical and self-defense optics. We're going to do a whole separate video on those, but just in general, I have some of those back here, and I'm going to bring some of them up here. So now when we get into talking optics for a tactical or self-defense rifle, now this becomes a little more mission critical than the plinking scope, the target scope. You may be hanging your life out on this. You want it to be reliable. You want it to be durable. You want it to work. You want it to stay sighted in. These typically come in either magnified or unmagnified versions. And I do highly recommend that on a tactical self-defense rifle that you also have iron sights. If something goes wrong with this, I can always fall back on the good old standby of iron sights. So you will see on all of my tactical self-defense rifles, they will have some kind of a manual sighting system on it. This gun here has a Trijicon MRO, which actually is one of my favorite red dots. It is non-magnified, meaning when you look through it, everything's the same size as it is with your naked eye, and you will see a lighted red dot inside of here. Typically, you want to shoot these both eyes open, quick target acquisition, and typically, out to 300 yards with this is a doable distance. So a lot of other people put a variable power scope on a self-defense rifle. This is a Vortex. It is a 1-to-4, meaning either 1 power or all the way up to 4 power. On 1 power, you can shoot it both eyes open with almost like you can the red dot. But if you need to shoot a little more accurate out at further distance, you can crank that up to 4 power and have a little more accuracy. So big fan of this scope. This right here is a Trijicon ACOG. This is a fixed 4 power scope, meaning you can't change it. It is 4 power. When you look through it, it's going to magnify things 4 times. These are excellent, high quality, bomb-proof optics that the military actually depends on. So very high quality. I also have up here maybe somebody's dream optic for a tactical rifle. This is a Elcan Spectre DR. This is a 1 or a 4. It's not variable. You can either have it on 1 power or you can hit the lever and take it up to 4 power. Very high quality, very expensive. So I've got that to show you. Next, I want to talk about hunting. Hunting, I think, is going to be a little bit higher quality than plinking because, one, you've invested all that money into your license and drawing that tag that you wanted to draw and going out and spending the time to hunt and maybe even backpacking. I'm a backpack hunter, so I tend to load up all my gear, hike up or horseback up 5-6 miles into the mountains, sleep in a tent. So when I get up there, I want a scope that is not going to fail me. I don't want my hunt to be ruined because the scope I took up on the mountain didn't work, or it fogged up, or it filled up with moisture inside my tent. So I typically would recommend, depending on your budget, you spend a little more on a hunting optic than you would on just a plinking optic. You will hear people say, spend as much on the scope as you did on the gun, and I tend to agree with that in most cases. I have hunted, though, all my life. I've hunted with Burris Full Field 2. I even had a horrible experience with an inexpensive scope that every time I shot it, it bashed me in the head because the eye relief was bad, and I missed 4 or 5 elk that year. I have now upgraded to, this is my hunting rifle, and I've got a Burris Veracity, which is their top of the line hunting scope. It's in a 4x20. I really love this scope. It's a little bit heavy, but the 4x20 for me is it's very good at all the things I do. I hunt antelope all the way up to elk, and this is really good for reaching out long range in the open country for antelope, or I can crank it down to 4 and hunt in tight trees. So very good quality scope. Good light gathering capability, very rugged, very fog resistant, really good at gathering light in low light. That's something to think about with a scope, a hunting scope, is most of the animals we hunt are crepuscular, meaning they are going to be active in that early morning and late evening right before the sun goes down. That's probably going to be your best time to see an animal and get a shot. So it's important that your scope has really good ability to gather light in those low light conditions. A more expensive scope typically gathers more light. A scope with a larger objective out here is going to gather more light than a smaller one. A scope with a bigger tube is going to gather more light, and typically the more you pay for the scope, the better the glass and the more light gathering capability it's going to have. Something else to think about in a hunting scope is, and I know we can argue about this all day long, we can argue about ethical shot distance and long range. I know my limits. I practice with this gun a lot, and I'm pretty good with this gun out to about 700 yards. I don't think I would shoot that far at an animal, but my ethical range is probably going to be closer to 500 yards and in, depending on the scenario. But you have to decide with your hunting scope, are you going to dial? Are you going to turn your knobs for compensating for that bullet drop? Or are you going to go out and shoot at different distances and know your holdovers? And if you look on this gun, I have shot my holdovers all the way out to 744 yards, and I have a little graphic on the side that I can look at. I range the animal, and then I know my holdovers. And I do practice at these distances quite a bit. So I am more of, for a hunting scope, sight it in, put my caps on, learn my holdovers, than I am dialing those holdovers into the optic. I've seen too many people not put those back to 0, or they get turned when you're on the horse, and next thing you know, you're missing shots because your dials got turned. So just an opinion. It's what's worked for me. I know there's guys out there that are dialing in distances and making really long shots, but That's just my take on it. I also have, this is a great little rifle scope. This is a Ruger M77 and 7mm mag. It's got an inexpensive 3-9 Nikon scope on it. I have taken more big animals with this gun than with any of my guns. So it's not always what you pay for it, but this is good glass. I've had good luck with it in the tent. It's never fogged up on me. So pretty good scope for the money and a very accurate rifle. All right, now let's talk a little bit about precision long range shooting. And typically long range is anything past 400 yards, and we can have that discussion too. But once you get out past 400 yards, then you're going to see some limitations on the shooter, the gun, the ammo, and the optic. And I have had long range classes at my house where I've seen people come out with an inexpensive entry-level hunting rifle, inexpensive entry-level scope, and take it all the way out to 700 yards. It happens. But typically anything past 400 yards and we start to see some limitations. So this is my long range rifle. It's built on a Tikka T3X KRG chassis, Burris XTR2 scope, and I do have an American Defense quick detach mount, Thunder Beast suppressor, 5-25. We also have semi-automatic Seekins with a Steiner, high quality Steiner. And I talked about the mount earlier. This has a spur mount. This is probably one of the best high quality mounts you can get for long range shooting. Excellent, excellent mount. Again, we're getting up into more expensive stuff here. And then probably the cream of the crop, a Sodic rifle in a KRG chassis with a Tangent Theta scope on it. This is, as far as I know, about as expensive and high quality as you can get. What more am I getting when I step into these higher quality, more expensive, long range precision rifle scopes? One, better glass, clearer glass. They'll talk about clarity all the way out to the edge. Again, under 400 yards and that stuff isn't as important, but when you start looking at targets at 1,000, 1,200, if you don't have really clear glass, as you start to dial that magnification up, things are going to blur out. The mirage is going to be way more evident and harder to deal with less expensive glass. You're going to dial these scopes. So when you shoot at 1,000, you're going to dial up and down. A high quality scope will track accurately, meaning if you click it 20 clicks up and then you click it 20 clicks down, it's going to be exactly in the same place when you get back. A less expensive scope, when you dial it 20 clicks up and you take it 20 clicks back down, sometimes that reticle does not track as accurately. So a less expensive scope, you tend to sight it in and then leave it alone. Whereas these, you're always turning these turrets left, right, up, and down. Some people will dial for wind. Some people will just use holdovers for wind. But when you start dialing your turrets, you need to have a high quality glass that tracks accurately. And you can do tracking drills, tracking tests where you turn your knobs 20, see where it hits, turn it back 20, make sure you're back to 0. But you get what you pay for when you get up into these higher quality. A lower quality scope too may not have enough clicks, enough adjustment to compensate for longer ranges. Like I said earlier, when you get out past 700, a lot of scopes you just can't dial. The dial will stop. There's no more adjustment after a certain point. Where these more expensive scopes, these long range scopes, tend to have way more ability to do more adjustment on the scope. And you're going to need that when you get out to longer ranges, especially out past 1,000. You can also do what's called a canted mount. Most people with a long-range gun, the mount is actually at an angle, which just simply allows you to dial more holdover into your scope. And we're going to do a video specifically on canted mounts and how that works. Again, there's a lot to think about when you go to spend your hard-earned money on an optic. Today I just gave you some general ideas on what you need to consider, things to think about, and this is just the start of a whole series of videos we're going to do on all these different subjects. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more content from us, click on the like button and subscribe to our channel. If you have some ideas on what you want us to cover in this scope series, put them in the comments and we'll do our best to cover what you guys want to see. So thanks again for tuning in and watching the video, and like and subscribe.